Senator Sanders is not offering security. He is offering a cage. The president's voice was like steel, cutting through the stunned silence of the briefing room. He calls his bill the People's Pension, but I call it what it is, the People's Pension Heist. And it stops today. The day began under the grand, gilded ceiling of a Senate hearing room. The air was thick with the self-importance that only Washington can generate. CSPAN's unblinking eye broadcast the scene to the nation. Senator Bernie Sanders, a man who had turned righteous indignation into an art form, stood at the podium. His shoulders were hunched forward, his hands chopping the air to punctuate his words, his voice a familiar gravelly boom. "It is a moral obscenity," he thundered, his Brooklyn accent sharpening the edges of his words. "An absolute obscenity that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, our seniors live in fear of poverty, while Wall Street billionaires treat the stock market like a private casino. For too long, their private pension funds, their 401ks, have been subjected to the whims and greed of a rigged system." He paused, letting the weight of his accusation settle over the room. His allies on the committee nodded with somber approval. "Today, I offer a solution. A permanent solution," he declared, his voice dropping to a dramatic conspiratorial tone. "I give you the Patriot Pension Act. This bill will empower the federal government to reallocate the vast, multi-trillion-dollar resources currently held in private retirement accounts into a single, nationalized system. One fund, for all people, managed by the people's representatives, guaranteeing a secure and dignified retirement for every single American, not just the privileged few." A junior senator from a swing state shifted uneasily in his seat. "Senator," he began, his voice hesitant, "when you say reallocate, are you suggesting the government would seize control of private assets?" Sanders shot him a withering glare, a look of pure disdain for such a simple-minded question. "Seize?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "That is the tired, fear-mongering language of the Wall Street charlatans. We are not seizing anything. We are pooling our collective resources for the common good. We are liberating the people's money from the gamblers and putting it to work for the people themselves. Do not be a coward in the face of history." The younger senator shrank back, the public rebuke stinging him into silence. The message was clear. You were either with the revolution, or you were an enemy of the people. Miles away, in the quiet sanctum of the Oval Office, President Donald Trump watched the clip on an aides tablet. He didn't rage. He didn't pound the desk. A calm, chilling focus settled over his features. He saw past the booming rhetoric and the moral posturing. He saw the architecture of a lie. He muted the video and looked at his chief of staff. "He's calling it the Patriot Pension Act. The man has a certain cynical genius, I'll give him that." He stood and walked to the resolute desk, his movements deliberate. "Get me the Secretary of Labor. Now. Tell him to bring the file we've been building on this. And get the communications team in here. We're not going to debate this fantasy on his terms. We're not going to argue about socialism versus capitalism. We're going to expose a fraud." He picked up the phone. "And get me a list of the 2 best forensic accountants in America. The ones who can explain a Ponzi scheme to a 5-year-old. I want them in the White House in 2 hours. We're going to show the American people exactly what Bernie Sanders is trying to do to their life savings." The West Wing buzzed with a controlled urgency. While Sanders was on cable news, basking in the glow of his bold proposal, a different kind of team was assembling in a secure White House briefing room. The Secretary of Labor, a no-nonsense former prosecutor, laid out a series of documents. The 2 accountants, a man and a woman with eyes that seemed to see only numbers and patterns, got to work. "The language is brilliant, in a terrifying way," the female accountant, a woman named Sarah, murmured, pointing to a section of the bill on a large monitor. "Look here. Projected returns based on new social and infrastructure investments. There's no underlying asset. No stress test. The entire model is based on the assumption that the government can spend its way to prosperity, and the fund will just magically grow. It's worse than that," her colleague Mark added, circling a set of figures in red. His own actuaries, buried in Appendix G, show the system is insolvent from day one. The cash outflow to current retirees would immediately exceed the value of the quote-quote free allocated assets. To make up the shortfall, they'd have to either print money into oblivion or, more likely, slash the promised benefits. It's a bait and switch. The Labor Secretary nodded grimly. It's a heist. He promises them a golden goose and leaves them with a bag of feathers. The president was right. This isn't a policy proposal. It's a national emergency. That afternoon, the White House announced an unscheduled presidential address. The James S. Brady press briefing room was a hive of frantic energy. Reporters, smelling blood in the water, packed every seat. No one knew what was coming. President Trump walked to the podium, not with his usual rally bravado, but with the somber gravity of a leader about to deliver grave news. He gripped the sides of the lectern and looked out over the sea of cameras. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice measured and clear. This morning, a proposal was put forth in the United States Senate. A proposal wrapped in the language of compassion, but rooted in the soil of tyranny. It was sold as a promise of security, but in reality it is a threat to the financial survival of every American who has spent a lifetime working, saving, and planning for their future. He gestured to the side of the stage. I have with me today two of the nation's leading forensic accountants, Sarah Evans and Mark Riley. They have spent the last several hours analyzing the, quote, Patriot Pension Act. And they are here to show you what its author has tried so desperately to hide. Sarah and Mark stepped forward. On the large screen behind them, a simple chart appeared. It showed a photo of a smiling 65-year-old retired schoolteacher. Next to her was the value of her 401k, $485,000. Under Senator Sanders' plan, Sarah explained, her voice crisp and professional, this teacher's private managed fund would be dissolved. The assets would be reallocated into the new national fund. An animation played. The teacher's money flowed into a massive pot, labeled Patriot Pension Fund. Then, a series of red arrows labeled Current Payouts, Administrative Costs, and New Government Projects began draining the pot at a terrifying rate. The teacher's original balance of $485,000 began to plummet on screen. Within a simulated 5 years, the guaranteed government pension it provided was worth less than a third of her original savings. The room was silent. The simple, devastating visual had done more damage than an hour of political debate. Trump stepped back to the podium, his face a mask of cold fury. You see, the fatal flaw isn't a mistake, the president said, his voice low and intense. It's the entire point. The system is designed to fail as a pension, because its true purpose is to succeed as a government slush fund. It is the greatest theft of private property in the history of the world, disguised as a social good. He leaned into the microphone, his eyes finding the central camera, speaking not to the reporters, but to the millions of Americans watching at home. Senator Sanders is not offering security, he is offering a cage. The president's voice was like steel, cutting through the stunned silence of the briefing room. He calls his bill the People's Pension, but I call it what it is, the People's Pension Heist, and it stops today. He paused, letting the power of the accusation land. This isn't about politics. This is about your life, your family. The money you put aside from every paycheck, believing in the promise of a secure future. That is a sacred trust. Senator Sanders looks at your life savings and sees a political tool. I look at it and see the embodiment of the American dream. His gaze hardened. To Senator Sanders, I have a simple message. You will not plunder the retirement of the American people to fund your failed utopia. You will not sacrifice the security of our seniors on the altar of your radical ideology. Not today. Not ever. Not on my watch. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. In his Senate office, Bernie Sanders watched the broadcast, his face a mottled canvas of rage and disbelief. It's a lie, a smear, he bellowed at a terrified young aide. They're twisting the numbers. It's for the people. Why can't they see it's for the people? But it was too late. His phone lit up with calls from panicked senators from his own party, retracting their support. News channels played clips of truckers, nurses, and factory workers, the very people Sanders claimed to champion, expressing white-hot fury. They understood the president's simple analogy. They understood the heist. By nightfall, the Patriot Pension Act was not just dead. It was a toxic stain on its author's legacy. In the Oval Office, the late news played on a television in the corner. President Trump stood looking out the window at the Washington Monument, a beacon in the dark. He had faced down the socialist siren song, not with insults, but with irrefutable truth. He had trusted the intelligence of the American people to see through the deception, and they had. He hadn't just defeated a bill. He had defended the fundamental promise of America, that what you earn through a lifetime of honest work is yours to keep, and a president's most sacred duty is to protect it. Was President Trump's direct, confrontational method the only way to expose the bill's flaws, or could a different approach have worked? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of conviction and consequence.